Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 5th of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, I have to say, I'm glad to be back, Mike, and credit to Scotland for a couple of days because the weather was sunny, really excellent.
It's all changed.
It's all changed. Raining and particularly unpleasant overnight here in Devon. And reports at the moment across the country a bit mixed. So we've got some sunshine in London. I think Norfolk is overcast and Glasgow's now on the wet side. So sun follows the righteous, apparently. With that note, we'll move on to British politicians. It's interesting to watch, Mike, as people are discussing Brexit as being the key issue at the moment. We're starting to get a good in-depth look at the quality of Britain's politicians. So we better start with Mr. Vaz. And this was part of a headline some time ago, lubricated against failure. Well, it doesn't appear so because, of course, Mr. Vaz has now been forced to step down as chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee. And, well, what's been going on is a little tete-a-tete with a couple of prostitutes. And it seems drugs are involved as well, as you do if you're a British politician. But this is an extremely interesting man, and what we needed to remember is what sort of history he's got. So he was sacked as the Europe Minister in 2001, following claims that he helped the billionaire Indian Hinduja brothers. That was all to do with passports. But of course, he was legal officer in Islington when we had Margaret Hodge, who didn't want to get too close to what was going on in children's homes. So as leader of, sorry.
So I was just going to say that probably explains why Jeremy Corbyn was giving him his support today.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? Mr. Corbyn a little bit too close to some of these rather dubious dealings to do with children in the inner London boroughs. But as it says here, as leader of Islington Council in the 1980s and early 1990s, Margaret Hodge was accused of complacency over allegations of serious sexual abuse against children in the authorities' care homes. And the significance is that Mr. Vaz was the legal officer, so he would have known.
Margaret Hodge was on Radio 4 a few weeks ago, Brian, and she was saying that the whole Islington scandal was the biggest her biggest embarrassment in her political career. And she said that, when the allegations from children were coming out about abuse in care homes and so on, she had had several meetings about it. And that was pretty much as far as it went. She had several meetings about it. And who did she meet? She met other members of the council, the police and social services.
Yeah.
And she says her biggest regret was that she didn't speak to any of the alleged victims.
No, you don't want to talk to them.
Do that. But no. Of course, Keith Vaz would have been right in the heart of those meetings then.
Legal officer, he would have known exactly what was going on. But she was a bit embarrassed. Don't want to talk to the victims because that could be disastrous if you're in government. So if we can just pop that one back on screen, let's add the bit here because we've got in the Independent in January 2014. And they're talking about Mr. Vaz mired in near scandals, actual scandals, watchdog scrutinies, leaks, accusations, investigation, complaints and suspension. But he's glided through it all in his elaborately polite way. And this is where the quote comes in, lubricated against failure. So this man at the heart of government, and of course this is exactly what the Tory party is about. Make sure the door is kept firmly closed to protect people who are abusing children. So he says that anybody accused of sexual impropriety or playing around with children, you've got to keep that anonymous. And this is what he said, that basically reform of the police bail rules was long overdue. It was unacceptable that people could be kept on bail for months and then be told there'd be no action taken against them. And he called it the flypaper practice of arresting someone, leaking, now note this, leaking the details, then endlessly rebailing them in the vague hope that other people come forward. But what we know at the moment, of course, is that every time one of these high-profile people has been named, people have been coming out of everywhere to make accusations, with the police saying we can't cope with the number of people reporting abuse. But Mr. Vaz, good member of Parliament, let's keep a lid on it and make sure we don't get too close to the victims of that abuse. So if we can just pop this one on screen here, we've got, this was back in 2014 when they were setting up the committee for child abuse. Of course, Mr. Vaz, ideal man to chair it, don't you think, Mike?
Absolutely.
But one of the things he said very early on was the committee was able to meet in private session to hear from some of the victims. So certainly don't want their comments to be coming out in front of the public. So a nice little closed door session going on there. And where does that lead us? Well, we can bring in just some of the members of the panel. NAPAC in there and PACE. But essentially this is agencies brought into these closed door sessions, but never any members of the public. You don't want to see too much there. And keep it behind closed doors, nobody knows. So let's add a bit more to him, because of course The Guardian some time ago had a very good article here. Keith Vaz helped kill a 90s probe into Grenville Janner claims. Why is he silent now? Well, I think that's pretty obvious. This is Jay Rayner here saying, last week in The Observer, I described how my 1991 investigations into allegations of child sex abuse by former Leicester MP Granville were brought to a halt by supportive statements in the Commons from MPs. Key among them was Vaz. So never mind the abuse victims. Let's make sure that we're protecting the great and good. But it took Russia Today here to say that some of the victims were actually receiving death threats after a minister published their names online. Well, who do we think that minister would have been? Well, it was the chairman himself, who mistakenly, do you think, or deliberately, we don't know, but he uploaded emails from those who'd suffered abuse. And of course, they were very scared people to have been outed publicly. And this was a comment from John Mann at the time. Keith Vaz demands anonymity for child abuse suspects, but says nothing, speaks to no one about the rights of child abuse survivors. So I think the picture is pretty clear here, Mike, that we've got government ministers, some of whom clearly are involved in the abuse of children, others, they're the place people to make sure it's covered up.
But every time one of these scandals starts to hit the press, it's always Keith Vaz that's rolled out as the fixer.
Well, he's very smooth, isn't he? He's very well spoken. He's a member of society. Clearly, he wouldn't do anything like be in a room with prostitutes and asking for drugs. Well, who's the other person to come out of the woodwork to offer support? None other than Peter Tatchell. And I think this one is absolutely on the button, because he said Keith Vaz hasn't broken any laws and he shouldn't resign as chairman of the Home Affairs Committee, because, according to Mr. Tatchell, it's perfectly normal now to pick up a few rent boys, go and have a few poppers, and then sit in Westminster telling the rest of us what we should be doing. Peter Tatchell, I think also a man many people have said, I never pinned down whether it was true, but he was campaigning to lower the age of consent.
Oh, he absolutely was.
He was.
Yeah, he was, yes.
So Mr. Tatchell wants to get that age of consent down, so we're blurring the boundary between adults and young people and children. But here he is coming out and supporting Keith Vaz. So we'll finish off with a little bit of a reminder on this subject. And who is going to be reporting this? Well, of course, it's going to be the BBC. And this is The Guardian pointing out that the BBC had a purge of journalists who were unhappy about reporting about Jimmy Savile. So the reporter here said that the BBC press office bridled when I described Jones and McKean as whistleblowers. And they said, well, after the Pollard review, you shouldn't recall them that. BBC thought that was a bit unkind. And we've got Tom Giles, editor of Panorama, who does the right thing with regard to saying, I don't agree with what the BBC did. He was moved out of the way. And then came in Kerry Thomas. And of course, what did Mr. Thomas do? Headed up Panorama, and they produced a programme which was basically undermining all of the reports about the abuse of children. So I'll just say, don't worry though, because we've had other upstanding MPs, Leon Britton here, who says it's up to politicians to prevent crime, the BBC in the background supporting them. So I take it, Mike, that the government is really getting geared up to stamp down on crime.
Before we get into that, I was just going to ask what you thought. Is Keith Vaz sacrificing himself in the way that others have done in the past? Is this about to launch a new attack on the press?
That's certainly in the background, Mike, isn't it? Because already he's saying, I was drugged. Well, according to the tapes that seem to be circulating, he was the one asking for those drugs, but he said he might have been drugged. And this was a sting operation by the press. So yes, I think this could be nicely backed into the whole of the Leveson cesspit. And then we get a double whammy because we can cover up the abuse of the children, and at the same time we can censor the press, which would be ideal.
Indeed. Okay, anyway, as you say, economic crime. This is the 34th International Symposium on Economic Crime, and it's taking place this week. So, of course, the government are pushing this, and the title for this symposium is Economic Crime. Where does the buck stop? Who's responsible? Facilitators, controllers, and/or their advisors. So yesterday was the opening, and the Right Honourable Jeremy Wright, QC MP, who is, do you know who he is?
I'm afraid I don't, but if he's a QC, I trust him implicitly.
Well, he is the Attorney General, and you know, you would have thought his name would have been tripping off everybody's tongues, but I think probably nobody knows who he is. And he said this is an important event in bringing together people from all disciplines and promoting understanding and addressing the challenges of economic crime faced around the world. As Attorney General, I superintend the Crown Prosecution Service and the Serious Fraud Office and work with Cabinet colleagues to lead the fight against economic crime and corruption. You'd think they would begin with themselves. But anyway, he goes on to say, addressing this threat is a government priority, so I'm very pleased to be here again to talk about this threat and how we're dealing with it. The theme of this year's symposium addresses the question, who's responsible for economic crime? It is an important question, and addressing it will make our response even more effective. Firstly, I want to say a little bit about the threat faced today from economic crime and how the UK government working together, bit of a Freudian slip there, working together with our international partners is addressing it. And this is the key point, international. So he goes on to describe the scale of economic crime, who's affected by it. And then he says that the challenge of economic crime is so great that it's not one that regulators and the criminal justice service can tackle alone or in isolation from the rest of the world. So here we go. And he goes on to say, a commitment to punish the corrupt and support those who've suffered from corruption is what the government is all about. So he's going to support those who suffered from corruption. I don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. He goes on to say, as part of this, the UK is consulting on stronger asset recovery legislation. And I thought this was the key point, including non-conviction based confiscation powers. So we're not going to have any kind of burden of proof that a crime has been committed. We're just going to allow people working for the authorities to decide who it is should have the property seized.
Yeah.
I just find that, and this is supposed to be an anti-economic crime symposium, an anti-corruption symposium. This just opens the door wide open for the most unbelievable corruption.
Yeah, particularly when you've got no separation of the powers, and you've got the courts working hand in hand with the police. Particularly so north of the border in Scotland.
Absolutely. And then he went on to say, often employers might not even realise that they're colluding in unlawful acts. Employees might not realise that they're colluding in unlawful acts. Examples need to be set and education provided from the top down to prevent further abuses. And he goes on to talk about the LIBOR scandal and so on. And let's just remember that when it comes to LIBOR, so far only 4 individuals have been prosecuted for those billions of pounds of fraudulent activity. And of course, those were all low-level traders for Barclays Bank. None of the Barclays management was prosecuted. None of the management of any other bank that was involved in it was prosecuted. They merely fined the banks a couple of £1 billion here or there, which they just printed out of nothing anyway. So banks not punished. No punishment for any individual management. There's no top-down attack on the people involved in this whatsoever. But he's pretending at this symposium to be backing this notion that we deal with this problem from the top down. If we start dealing with this problem within Parliament itself, we might make some progress.
But the whole thing had come unravelled. So this is a smokescreen, isn't it, to protect the real people, which are the major global banking players who are running the fraud and corruption.
Absolutely. So sticking with the same subject of fraud and corruption, let's have a look at free trade. Because, of course, Theresa May has been off in China at the G20 summit. And while she was there, she has set out her ambition for the UK to become the global leader in free trade. Now, I'm going to say that this is exactly the point that we were making in all the furore we were making about the EU referendum. And I still think that people don't quite get what Brexit is about and what Brexit has been about. Brexit is and was never about getting Britain out of the European Union. Brexit is a reorientation of Britain's policies, and as this best of both worlds document made clear, the UK's top priority as regards trade was TTIP, still is TTIP, and it is these trade deals as a matter of principle. So basically what Theresa May is doing is she has reoriented Britain's policy to push for these trade deals in a host of different directions, not just the three main ones that we've been talking about over the last several months. And here's what she said: we're going to make a success of Brexit, and one way we will do that is by playing to Britain's strengths as a great trading nation and forging our own new trade deals around the world. Britain is going to drive these so-called free trade, corporatist free trade deals. It's absolutely at the heart of British policy, and that's Brexit is being used as the motivation for it.
Yeah, the other thing here, Mike, is the statement of it that we are going to do these massive world trade deals. I spent a bit of time driving on the motorways, British motorways, over the weekend. Utter chaos and mayhem on the claim that we've got intelligent motorways. Well, most of what I saw was pretty dumb. We saw massive signs saying that there was a tenth of a penny difference in petrol per litre of petrol. Absolute chaos, spying on the motorist. We can't get our own infrastructure right, but we're going to do international trade deals which are going to change us and change the world. It's fantasy land these people are living in.
Absolutely, and perhaps the G20 gives us a clue. Before I comment on this, I just wanted to mention the G20 logo here. I want to just read what G20 says this logo represents. It says G20 2016 China, and it looks like an eye, but it's not. The eyelids are 20 lines. So here's what it says. The logo for the 2016 G20 summit incorporates a stylized bridge consisting of 20 layered lines symbolizing the 20 members of the group, and a seal with the Chinese characters in traditional Chinese font. The bridge signifies that the G20 is a bridge for global economic growth, international cooperation, and a win-win future. The layered lines are reminiscent of fiber optic cables representing an interconnected world in the information age. The letter O, highlighted in the image of G20, in fact, it's a 0, isn't it?
Well, yeah, this is very interesting. Yes. This is what they say, though, Mike.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
yes. Highlighted in the image of G20, embodies unity and coordination among G20 members. The seal is a representation of traditional Chinese culture and matches the English word China. Well, there you go. So that's what that stands for. But anyway, nonetheless, President Xi was giving, it was kind of a pre-meeting, because just before the G20 starts, they have the B20, which is the business 20, and he was speaking at that and talking about how he views China's role in the world. He's saying that China is blazing a new trail, here's what he says: modernizing a big country with a population of 1.3 billion is an endeavor never undertaken in the history of mankind. and this means China must pursue its own path of development. What we have done is, as a Chinese saying puts it, we're crossing the river by feeling for stones. We have deepened reform and opening up broken new ground, forged ahead and established and developed socialism with distinctive Chinese features. And he's saying that he's aiming to deliver tangible outcomes and so on. What's the next thing? We've taken bold initiatives and lifted over 700 million people out of poverty. And this is the course that China and the world should take. For this purpose, we've introduced large-scale investment overseas. The key point is that he is delivering, despite how sort of skeptical we might be about China and China's recent history, he is delivering a relatively positive message. He's talking about building a peaceful and stable international environment. He's saying that history has proven time and again that without peace, there'll be no development, and without stability, there's no prosperity. It is important to reject the outdated Cold War mentality. And so we're getting all this positive language out of China and Russia at the moment, and we're getting nothing positive out of...
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yes. So we'll keep an eye on what's going on there. I think there's a line being drawn economically, and I want to, there's been a lot of conversation over the last year or two about whether Western financial interests are going to take over the BRICS initiative. I wonder whether it's going to be the opposite case, that the Chinese and the Russians are going to take over the IMF, the World Bank, and the various internationalist bodies. I'm not quite sure how that would end up.
It will be interesting, Mike, I think,
Yes.
is as far as I can go on today's news. Well, one thing is for sure, that within UK at the moment, we have a total breakdown of law and order. So on the 19th of November this year, the British Constitution Group is holding a conference in Winchester. Now, the topic is the restoration of law. This is recognising at the moment that none of our traditional system of common law is being used. We're not seeing juries used properly, and they're not getting their true power to make decisions. And all of this at the moment is allowing corruption, which we've been talking about just a few moments ago, to continue. So if you've never been to a British Constitution Group conference before, this is the one that I would suggest you need to come to. And the theme is a very strong theme on restoring the rule of law. And if you want more details, please get in touch with the British Constitution Group, and Justin Walker or Theo will be happy to tell you more about that event. And also have a look at the history around Winchester, and you'll be able to see why Justin has selected that venue for the event. So for people who are looking at what's happening in the country and saying, well, can we do anything? We can't do anything. We can do something, but what it requires is many good people to come together and be working together in order to bring this corrupt British government to account. It's up to us to do it, really. And how bad is it? Well, let's not forget that we've got Theresa May now as Prime Minister, in fact, former Home Secretary. But when she was Home Secretary, of course, she was the one appointing Eilish Angelini to lead a review of deaths in custody. Think about this with the background of Keith Vaz that we've just gone through. And of course, in Scotland, we had the cover-up of the Sheku Bayu death, absolutely horrific. But who was the head of the legal team that Eilish Angelini was using? None other than Peter Watson, who was then later embroiled in the Heather Capital fraud. We don't know what's happened because that court case has gone very, very quiet. So Peter Watson, who was also a judge, working as a judge north of the border, he gets suspended over the Heather Capital collapse and fraud. But Eilish Angelini is the ideal person to run the campaign. And what did Theresa May? She said that Dame Eilish had all the qualities necessary to head the important review. And we said at the time, of course, she does, Theresa. We have said several times, we don't make this stuff up. We don't have to. It's just becoming obvious that we've got a group of totally dishonourable people running the country. And what does that allow them to do? It allows them to put people in prison instead of helping them. And I've been asking as many people as possible to give help to Melanie Shaw, who is back in prison in HMP Foston Hall in Uttoxeter Road, Derby. And how did she get there? Well, Theresa May put her there, is the simple answer. But what we've been pointing out is she's in solitary confinement for the public protection, apparently, Mike. But somebody's come out with some words of wisdom. In the Irish Times, the Northern Ireland Prison Ombudsman says that time in isolation is very bad for the mind. This is what he had to say. Solitary confinement can impact on the mental health of prison inmates, especially those already affected with psychiatric difficulties. Of course, as a child sex abuse victim, that is likely to be your situation. And yet that is exactly what they've done to Melanie Shaw. And we know this is going on with other people.
Britain doesn't torture people, Brian.
We don't torture people. We just disappear them, as you've seen in Argentina or Chile. So do we need that British Constitution Group conference? We certainly do. And we'll also remind people that after that very brave Metropolitan Police whistleblower spoke out about how MPs, the government, local authorities and child protection charities covered up the abuse of children in London, we've now had 38 days of silence from the former policing minister, Mike Penning, the present policing minister, Brendan Lewis, of course, total silence from Amber Rudd, Home Secretary. Don't think she was awake in that picture. And Theresa May, well, we know what she's up to. So if you're watching from overseas, you're watching Britain now governed by a political elite that are not only involved in the abuse of children, but are certainly prepared to cover it up. Nice stuff.
Yes. Now, immigration. Now, of course, Theresa May has said that we're not going to run a point system for immigration. That's too complicated or something. But I just wanted to highlight this article in The Guardian because it's a comment on the killing of a Polish man last week, I think it was. I'll just read the first paragraph. It says, "Let me start with a disclaimer. We still do not know what was the motive behind the attack on a group of Polish men in Harlow over the bank holiday weekend that resulted in the death of a 40-year-old Polish man. It could be a hate crime, but not necessarily. But to many of the hundreds who gathered on Saturday to take part in a silent, emotional march through Harlow streets, one thing is clear. The problem with post-referendum racism is real." Because, Brian, overnight in this country, the day after the referendum result came out, people suddenly became racist.
Yeah. So that article says they're not sure what the cause was, but they then link it to...
Absolutely, and this is something that the media has been doing. So if we just put that one up again for a second, Theo, because what I just wanted to say is the Polish community, and I have very close connections with the Polish community, but the Polish community needs to waken up and smell the roses a little bit here, because there's a certain level of hypocrisy in this, because Poland absolutely is one of the only countries left in the European Union that is absolutely against any notion of immigration. They will not allow it in any way, shape or form. Poles don't want it. This is the Guardian themselves from last year, I think. Poles don't want immigrants. They don't understand them, don't like them. This is another Guardian article, Poles apart. Gdansk, divided as a city, grapples with immigration and identity. This is Politico. Poland slams door on refugees. And this is a Polish news website talking about a march of 70,000 people last year on the streets to prevent immigration. So Poland itself, totally anti-immigrant. So there is a certain hypocrisy in any shouts of racism on behalf of the British here. But the Guardian article, my main point here is that Guardian article is a piece of sheer propaganda, because nobody knows at least it's not been publicly announced, what the motivation for that attack was. And we know, and I know personally, that that attacks on Polish people in Plymouth, which have been alleged to be racist in nature, have turned out to be nothing of the kind, and more to do with business practices of the person on the receiving end of it. So this is a pretty dangerous development within the press, and they need to wise up a little bit.
And we are seeing British press now just becoming overt in propaganda in order to help a government objective. So the nation has voted to come out. What are the press doing? Government propaganda to help that Brexit lock-in.
Yeah.
Pretty obvious.
Yes. And okay, still everything is Brexit these days. So here's another one, this time from the Financial Times. This is a bit of financial news. Big bang too. After Brexit, what's next for the City of London? And it begins by saying, one chilly morning in the mid-1970s, David Mayhew was tramping the streets of the City of London. His mission to head off a stock market crash. The Bank of England had asked Mayhew, a dealing partner at Casanova, and a few other city brokers, to support it in a clandestine operation. In today's terms, it would be completely illegal. Well, this is complete nonsense because it's still happening on a daily basis.
And it's still illegal.
Well, indeed. But then the financial world never worries too much about that. The article goes on to say Brexit may mean a reverse in the Big Bang from the UK's relationship with Europe. And that's according to Pierre-Henri Flamand, who's a senior portfolio manager at GLG Partners. But it could mean Big Bang too for its relationship with the rest of the world. So what they're really saying is that they're hoping that we're going to see a similar effect. If you remember back to the 80s when Margaret Thatcher pushed through the Big Bang in the first place, one of the things that she did was to get rid of the separation between retail banks and investment banks. And this was something that in Britain, at least, we didn't have Glass-Steagall legislation in this country. We had a typically unwritten convention, and that convention was torn up, and the banks started to merge and to mix their activities. That released the Big Bang and the bringing in of computers and technology into the financial world, and that really gave the City of London the massive boost that it's seen in the last 20 or 30 years. And so this article really hoping that we're going to see a similar effect as a result of Brexit. I'm hoping quite the opposite.
Okay, well, it said after Brexit, what's next for the City of London? And I wondered whether the next had already happened. I was fascinated to pick this up this morning. I hadn't seen it over the weekend, but huge recreation of Great Fire of London, where this vast model was set ablaze on the Thames. And this is celebrating what? It's celebrating 80% destruction of the City of London. It's celebrating deaths, loss of property, destruction of businesses. Would you say, where's the celebration? Was it perhaps for the creation of the City of London? Well, I had a little look at the article. I always go for who the people are. And what you come up with pretty quickly is that Artichoke, that helped set up the London event, are linked into the American Burning Man organisation. This is an annual event where things are burnt out in the American desert. And the latest one that they've done, so the two things closely linked, is to have built a large and very intricate ornamental temple, which was then burnt down. And I just thought to myself, well, it's a temple, but that's got a spiritual base to it. People normally go into temples to worship higher powers. And Theo, if you can pop that one back on. Of course, the reality of the American operation is the Burning Man itself, or the Wicker Man. So I sense something pretty unpleasant here, Mike. And who are these people that have suddenly been able to raise millions of pounds in order to enjoy burning of models from the Fire of London? I think there's something a bit more to it than just advertising. Now, let's move on to what's happening in the world around military affairs. And we have this astonishing situation where ships that were built for the Russians, the Mistral class amphibious support ships, have now been passed over to Egypt. So the first one's just been handed over, and the Egyptians are saying we now have advanced capabilities in confronting terrorism within our borders and on our shores. So you don't have ships like this anymore to fight wars. All of the military around the world now are simply there to fight terrorism, apparently. But I thought it was quite interesting. Now, credit to the Russians, because they were a bit upset with the French. Russians been putting some pretty attractive women into our society in order to pick up those naughty British politicians. We've got two on the right, Brooks Newmark and Chris Bryant, both fully exposed. And this was the article where the MOD was warning senior officials before postings to Russia or China. Was that people going to China in order to set up our nuclear infrastructure? They were worried?
Don't know.
They might have their clothes off? I don't know. So anyway, the Russians a bit upset about their ships going to Egypt after they'd paid the French for them. I think they have got some money back. But we just like to remind people, of course, that while the Egyptians are getting some modern ships, the Royal Navy, which is worried about the rise of Russian military power, is going to get rid of the fleet flagship, scrapped after a refit. So it's all common sense defence policy that I can see.
Well, maybe it's replacing it with this. This is the Blade Runner, and apparently the Royal Navy is going to be testing this boat at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon between Tower Bridge and London Bridge. HMS Archer is going to be on hand, I guess, to control it. This appears to be a remotely controlled autonomous. Well, it's not autonomous because it's remotely controlled, but it is a drone of a type. And I just thought it was quite amusing. They were finally apparently catching up with Iran, because Iran managed to get one of these Blade Runner fast boats. I think this was 2010 or so, and they basically duplicated it. So we're catching up with them.
So Iran, of course, is on the nasty country list, but they happen to have got British technology, built something pretty spectacular out of it, and now we're catching up. But don't worry, Mike, because it'll probably be sold off in a couple of months.
Well, in fairness, theirs wasn't remotely controlled, but if you just stick that up again, if you want to go and see that, get onto the Thames between Tower Bridge and London Bridge in about 45 minutes, and you should catch a glimpse.
Of course, it may catch fire, in which case they can celebrate that along with the Great Fire of London.
Well, I'm not sure that the Thames water is warm enough.
If you're worried about terrorism, the truth is coming out, because there's a very nasty man, a Tajik gentleman, Golmurod Kalimov, who was fully trained in all things nasty, sniping, counter-terrorism ops. American Blackwater Company was part of the organisation training him, and he's now decided to hop across and has been named as the chief military commander for ISIS, better known as Daesh. So we've got the Americans putting a lot of effort into training this man, but they've decided that he's now gone slightly rogue, so they've come up with a $3 million reward in order to catch the terrorists who they trained in the first place.
Yes.
So there we are. Now, to leave you on a hopeful note for the UK and other Western nations, this is the one. Apparently, Facebook is offering 50 ways to define your gender. And if you like to read the Huffington Post lifestyle article about a person, I do not know what sex they are. I only know them as C.N. Lewis, a musician. And that particular musician says the word I would use for myself is genderqueer or androgynous or gender neutral. And the article says it's really good because social media is now forcing the majority of people to accept that we don't really know what sex we are. And in the future, you can be anything. And we'll leave you on that happy note, just saying, of course, that this is what will happen unless we, the wider public, decide that those in Westminster are possibly taking this country down the wrong path. Well, that's it for today. I'll just say thank you very much to people who are signing on, taking subscriptions and making donations. If you're new to UK Column and you haven't yet taken on a subscription, we'd very much like you to do that, because we can only do this with your help. And don't forget, 19th of November for the British Constitution Group conference in Winchester, and there'll be more on speakers for that shortly. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.